Hey everybody, welcome to the Warp. I'm Jack, and I'm going to be talking about Homebrew custom alternate timeline aliens. And these are all the alt timeline aliens that I have added to my tabletop simulator edition of Cosmic Encounter. And I think they would make good additions for people who do like to print out their own alt timeline aliens, and a lot of people have been doing it. I know that ever since the concept of the alt timeline alien was introduced in Cosmic Odyssey, it has fired up the imaginations of a lot of players. It's given them recourse to tinker with aliens that they don't really love the current effect and want to do a different version of it. It lets them curate a collection of aliens in their set that is more to their taste, which I knew that introducing that in the expansion was going to open a Pandora's box of craziness, but I also think that's pretty good. I mean, everyone has done revisions of aliens and have taken a crack at how they would have designed a particular alien rather than what was published. And that goes back to the original editions of Cosmic Encounter. So it's not a new concept. People have been doing it for a while, but now they've got something that feels more canon, with the template of how the alternate timeline alien sheets look. And a lot of people have been cranking those out. I've seen a lot of them on like the Cosmic Encounter Coliseum, which is a Discord community, also on Board Game Geek. So it's a fun concept. So I'm going to show 10 aliens that I have essentially done an alt timeline version or my own little revision of that alien, and talk about why I made the changes, what they do. Some of them are pretty minor, some of them are a little bit bigger. In most cases, I tried to stay very close to the original intent of the design of the alien. I know that some of the alt timeline aliens that are in Cosmic Odyssey are wildly different from the original versions, and I think that's okay too. I think that's a fun idea. It makes for some interesting interactions when you decide to keep both versions in your set. So here we go. These are my top 10 in no particular order, alt timeline aliens that I've done. Here we go. So first up we have the alt timeline version of Neighbor, which is in the same ballpark. The original Neighbor gets to add their own ships in the targeted system that are not involved in the encounter to the total, but that doesn't really happen very much in most games. You have to have gone to a system, won the encounter there, and then go to the system again. It can happen, and certainly in a smaller number of players, that's going to happen more often. But I tend to play in larger groups more than in smaller groups, so Neighbor was a really flat alien for me. So the new one, you get to add all the allies that are in the targeted system that are not involved in the encounter. So it's a big boost as compared to the original one. Next up, I have alt timeline Plant. So Plant is classic alien. It's a great alien, but it has a lot of issues. There's plenty of times where you really can't copy an alien. There's a lot of weird questions that are raised through the interactions, and this version certainly doesn't answer everything, but it is a more interesting version for me. So the way it works is at the start of each regroup, that is when you get to decide if you're going to use your alien power, and you will place a plant token on an alien sheet of a player in whose system you have a foreign colony, very much like the original Plant, or onto an alien sheet you have drawn as a seedling. You steal that alien's power for the rest of the encounter and may use it as appropriate, preventing anyone else from using it. And if you are unable to steal an alien power, or if all seedlings already have plant tokens, you draw an alien from those not in use, disregarding game setup or not allowed aliens, as a seedling. And then you're going to place a plant token on that, grafting its power. And then you collect all plant tokens at the end of the encounter when you do that. So it's a way to get more aliens into the game. It gives Plant more that it can do. It's not waiting in order to be successful before it ever gets an alien power. So this is a much more interesting version of Plant for me. I enjoy it. My alt timeline version of Saboteur is almost identical to the original version of Saboteur, except where the tokens are placed and how that works. So what's going to happen is you're placing these tokens face down next to any planets, and it's the same number of traps and decoys. But the way it works is a token is counted as being next to two adjacent planets. So when you place it in between planets, that is adjacent to the planet on either side. So anytime ships land on one of the planets that is adjacent to a token, you use that power to reveal it. So what's interesting is if you've got the center planet and people are landing on it, there's a token on either side of it, and you can choose to reveal either one. So you can reveal what you know is a decoy, and then later on somebody else lands on that planet, you can reveal the other one, and that's the trap. So it gives you much more flexibility, and plus, because you're placing them in between the planets, you're actually getting more coverage overall with this alt timeline version of Saboteur. This is how we've been playing Saboteur for a long time. It's just more interesting to me and more effective. Sloth is an alien that I didn't dislike, but I did feel like it could stand to be bumped up a little bit. So original Sloth, when they're going to put ships into the encounter, they can use the Sloth token as a delaying tactic, and then they can add their ships afterward, or decide not to add any ships at all, which is okay. This one is a little bit more effective. So as an offense or an ally, when you would send ships into the encounter, you can use your power to either retrieve the Sloth token from the warp, and we'll talk about how it gets there in a second, and then not send any ships, or you can send the Sloth token instead of deciding how many ships to commit. So after the encounter cards are selected, but before they're revealed, you replace the Sloth token with either 0 or 4 to 8 of your ships from any of your colonies. Then return the Sloth token to this sheet. If you send 0 ships to the offense, then you must still continue your encounter. That's if you're the offense. And if you replace the Sloth token with 0 ships as an ally, you are no longer an ally. And whenever you would lose ships, you may send the Sloth token to the warp instead. So you say, yeah, I'm going to commit 8 ships to it, and then if it doesn't work out, you can always sloth your way out of that. So there's a little bit of a, like, oh, okay, now my Sloth token is in there. I've got to deal with that. But I think it makes for a more interesting interaction, and it makes Sloth a lot more powerful. So I like this version better. It's still probably not perfect, and people will no doubt complain about it. But again, apples to apples, this is a better Sloth than the other one. Our next alien is SYCOPHANT. And SYCOPHANT, to me, just wasn't interesting enough on its own. It didn't really do anything. It was pretty low stakes. You could just say, all right, I think, the offense is going to win. I'm going to flatter them. And if they do, then great, I get the token. And if I don't, so what? Who cares? So there just wasn't enough going on with SYCOPHANT. So I jazzed it up a little bit. Still have the 10 tokens there on the start. You're still flattering the same way. If you're not a main player, after the alliances are formed, you can use your power to flatter one of the main players, even if you were allied against them. And if they win or make a deal, you discard 1 token. Now, if you're not correct about it, you remove any one of your ships on a colony from the game and placing it on the SYCOPHANT sheet. So, one of your ships out of the game, probably not a big deal early on, but that will add up eventually. So at any time, you may add a cosmic token to the sheet to return all of your ships on the sheet to any of your colonies. And then, of course, if there's no more tokens on the sheet, you immediately win the game. So a little bit of a penalty, some consequences for flattering the wrong side, and as well as a recourse for if you are wrong too many times, you've got your own way to get back into the game. So again, SYCOPHANT, still not one of my favorite aliens, but I do like this version better. I think it's more interesting. The alt-timeline version of Vox is straight out of Bill Martinson's suggestion for how to make Vox better. So all it does is it can be used to bump reinforcement up to 11, not just an attack card. As 11 is not that high for an attack card. If you're like, all right, my 6s and 8s and the handful of other cards that are less than 11, then can be boosted up. But yeah, there's a lot going on in the game where 11 is just not a very attractive number. So having a reinforcement that you can boost up to 11, that's a big deal. So I like this change. It's small but very effective. My alt timeline version of Phantasm, all that's different about it is that you don't automatically trigger it with negotiates, because the problem with the original version of Phantasm is that they really have a hard time making deals. They can't say, yeah, I'm willing to make a deal, let's make a deal, because You play the cards, and then you're like, oh, I got to draw. And, you know, sure, you can say, all right, well, I can win the encounter. But let's say that Phantasm's on the defense, and they want to get into a deal, because normally on the defense, you can't gain anything for winning. But if you make a deal, you could get a foreign colony. So Phantasm shouldn't be penalized, I think, for that. They should be able to make deals if they want to. So that was my big change to that version of Phantasm. My take on Pentaform is really just how me and my friends played Pentaform when we first played it in the Mayfair days. When we were adding Pentaform to Cosmic Dominion, the way that I was describing Pentaform was not the way that Bill Martinson played it, and he really wanted to stick to how he was used to Pentaform going. And we did go back and forth a few times, but I realized, you know what, it's not worth fighting over. And Jefferson apparently also didn't play it the way that we played it. So that was how that ended up being it. But for me, just having 6 alien sheets side by side it's just kind of messy and takes up too much space. Plus, the way that we played it was you took your 5 aliens, you drew them, and you drew them in secret. So nobody knew what your 5 stages were going to be. And you made a stack of them. And so they knew what your first stage was, but they didn't know what the next stages were going to be. And I liked that element of surprise. I liked that element of having to decide if they think you're going to get more powerful as the game goes on, because surely you will, but not being able to really prepare for it because they don't know what's coming. So I like that element too. It's not really much of a change to the alien. Everything else works the same, but you're making a stack rather than having a rainbow of aliens out in front of your system. All right, Coordinator is an alien that has been criticized for just not being terribly effective or interesting just because it's so limited in its usage. So I've bumped it up, and it's very much like the other suggestions that players have had for how to make Coordinator a more interesting and compelling alien. So after starting hands are dealt, whenever Coordinator would draw 1 or more cards from the top of any deck, so that's Cosmic, the Reward, Tech, Destiny, Flares, whichever, they can use their power, and they're going to draw 2 extra cards, choosing 1 to be the card that they're going to gain or that they're going to use. So if it's a Destiny, they get to draw 3 and choose the one that they want. If they're drawing cards for rewards, they're going to draw a couple of extra, and of those extra, they'll keep 1, and the other 2 they'll put at the bottom of the deck. So it gives them a lot more variety and flavor with which to be a more effective alien. So that's Coordinator. And finally, we have WARHAWK, which the only real change to this is making it optional. So I think that makes WARHAWK a much more powerful and interesting alien, and it helps you to avoid situations like I want to make a deal, but I can't make a deal. And the other is there's a little clause at the bottom that tells you what to do if you get yourself into an infinite loop where you're changing negotiates into attack cards and back into negotiates and blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of effects that will do that now in Cosmic Encounter. So it's good to have something somewhere that lets you know, what do we do in this situation? And so my sheet here for WARHAWK does that. So that's it for this one. Those are all of the aliens that I've done. I've done a couple of others, but again, the changes are pretty minor. In some cases, it's just working the errata into the alien sheet or adding some additional clarification. Or other things that just help make the alien make more sense when people are reading it, especially if they're new to it. For instance, I revised the Meek, which was an alien from Cosmic Odyssey. It still does exactly the same thing, but it's worded now in such a way that it clears up a lot of the issues, and I've talked about that before in other videos. So that's it for this one. Let me know your alt-timeline aliens. You know that I want to hear them and hear which aliens you think need the alt-timeline treatment more than others. Do you agree with the changes that I've made to my set? What do you think of those? And any other questions or comments you have about alt-timeline aliens? Do you like that concept? Do you think it's interesting? Is it taboo? Is it a scandal in your mind and all the aliens are fine the way that they were originally designed? Let's have that debate. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.